A big air show, loads of industry moves and a couple of truly devastating crashes meant that November was an especially eventful month for the world of aviation. So with that, it's time for another news roundup, looking at those big headline news as well as some smaller but still interesting stories that you might have missed. And we're going to start with this year's Dubai Airshow. This event is held every 2 years and, as tradition holds, it featured a lot of industry news, mostly involving aircraft orders by several Gulf airlines. Now, I'm not going to try and list all of them here, but a couple of them deserve quite a bit more attention. The first one spelled particularly good news for Boeing. The American aircraft maker got a new order from Emirates for 65 more 777-9s, and that means that Emirates now has a total of 270 aircraft orders for the Boeing 777X family. On its own, that new order is quite impressive because it shows that despite the unprecedented delays of the 777X program, which we have discussed in a recent video on this channel by the way, confidence in the capabilities of this new jet is still really high, even from Emirates' president, who has been a pretty vocal critic of those Boeing delays. But the even more interesting detail that came out of this order was that Emirates wants Boeing to consider making an even bigger version of the 777X, and Boeing appears to have agreed to study the possibility of doing that closely. Currently, the biggest variant of the 777X family is the Dash 9, with a smaller Dash 8 due to enter service in a couple of years if everything goes well. Now, if this new plan actually goes ahead, well then the biggest 777X will then be called the Dash 10, and it's easy to see why Emirates would want that. Currently, their biggest jet is the mighty Airbus A380, of which they've got over 100 flying, and it's no secret that Emirates is extremely unhappy about the fact that they can't get any new ones of those anymore. The Airbus A380 assembly line is now long gone, and there's no real prospect of a direct replacement either from Airbus or Boeing coming out, and the 777-10, if that happens, wouldn't quite match the size of the Airbus A380, but it would seat around 500 passengers depending on its cabin configuration. So that means that it would likely be close to what Emirates really need right now, since their Dubai hub is already close to maximum capacity using their current A380s and 777s. So they definitely need something bigger once the A380 starts disappearing. Now, Airbus also scored a smaller Emirates order for the Airbus A350-900, and obviously they too know full well how important the super jumbos are for the Gulf carrier. So according to sources, Airbus are now also considering a stretch version of their Airbus A350, which then they would probably call the Airbus A350-2000. Now, we're probably going to take a closer look at this battle of the new super jumbos in a separate video, but here is an early spoiler for you. For once, this is a battle that is looking very promising for Boeing. Now, after that 777X order, something else happened at the airshow that was very good news for Airbus. They announced an order for 150 Airbus A321neos from Flydubai, which is an airline that has so far been an all Boeing operator. So this meant that Airbus are now stealing a major Boeing customer. This loss was also made extra embarrassing for Boeing for another reason. You see, Flydubai's CEO explained that the airline turned to Airbus because they had to. Flydubai already flies the 737 MAX and has orders for more, but the biggest MAX variant, the MAX-10, doesn't quite match the range of even the basic Airbus A321neo, let alone the A321LR or XLR models. So like Iceland Air, who replaced all Boeing 757s with the Airbus A321neo, Flydubai were therefore basically forced into buying the same Airbus plane to give their route network some longer legs, which the 737 MAX 10 just wouldn't be able to handle at the moment. And that clearly exposes the limitations of Boeing's currently biggest single-aisle aircraft. Later in the show, Boeing softened that blow a little bit by getting a provisional Flydubai order for 75 more 737 MAXes with another 75 options. But With more and more Airbus operators switching over to the biggest Airbus A321neo, we're seeing a trend that Boeing basically have no answer for, until they finally launch a 737 replacement. We'll see when that happens. Unfortunately, the Dubai Airshow was also marked by a tragic accident. This time of a military Tejas fighter jet from India, which crashed in front of spectators on the 21st of November, which was the last day of the show. Now, this jet is equipped with an ejection seat, but sadly, the 46-year-old Indian pilot lost his life during the maneuver, and the full cause of the crash is now being investigated. Now, as I'm sure you know, this wasn't the only tragic aircraft loss that we saw in November. 10 days earlier, a Turkish Air Force Lockheed C-130E broke up in mid-air after departing from the Ganya International Airport in Azerbaijan on its way back to base in Turkey, and all 20 people on board sadly perished in the crash. But even before that, we also saw the horrific accident of UPS Flight 2976, a McDonnell Douglas MD-11 freighter who crashed shortly after takeoff in Louisville, Kentucky, United States. That accident claimed the lives of all 3 pilots on board, plus another 11 people on the ground, and our thoughts are with their families and the people of Louisville at this devastating time. Now, by the time that you watch this, we should have a separate video out looking at everything that we know about the circumstances surrounding this accident so far. And that's based on the NTSB's preliminary report, so I'm not going to get into the same details here. Instead, what I want to focus on in this video is the effects that this tragedy will have on the MD-11 freighter fleet. As we saw, shortly after the accident, FedEx and UPS grounded these planes, and then the FAA quickly made that grounding official on safety grounds. And that was something that they later also extended to any remaining DC-10s. Now, they did that because the DC-10 and the MD-11 share some, quite common design features, including the design of their engine pylons under the wings, which are obviously a main focus in this investigation. Now, UPS has a fleet of 26 MD-11s, FedEx has another 28, and Western Global Airlines has 15. And obviously, all of these jets are freighters, and we believe that all of them were also converted from passenger aircraft. By now, these MD-11s are very old planes, and as we explained in our previous video, the economy of freighter aircraft mean that these jets can remain profitable longer than you might imagine, despite their 3-engine layout. But already some years ago, many operators still hoped to replace them with converted Boeing 777-300ER freighter planes instead, and several of those conversion programs were also launched, with one certified so far. But there is a snag with that plan. You see, there just aren't enough 777-300ERs available for conversion at the moment. And they won't be available for conversion in high enough numbers until the newer Boeing 777X enters service, with the delays in that program being the real sticking point here. That's one reason why FedEx, for example, didn't plan to retire its MD-11s until 2032. But if this current grounding drags on and FedEx and UPS finds a way around these jets, well, then they might end up being retired much sooner. Such a development wouldn't just impact the airlines. It will also force hundreds of pilots, ground engineers and other personnel to be retrained to operate other types. And the latest information that we have is that the grounding of the MD-11 fleet now isn't expected to end until earliest 2026. With that in mind, Western Global decided to furlough its MD-11 pilots and other personnel. So this is a difficult time for everyone involved, especially since it comes on the back of an already devastating accident. Since the world is now so polarized and moves so fast, it's becoming harder and harder to find reliable sources and make sense of what's actually going on. Different outlets will frame the same story in completely different ways, which is something that we've had to navigate when researching this video, as we always do. And that's why we've been using Ground News, today's sponsor. You see, they gather thousands of articles from around the world and then show how each outlet frames the same story, including bias, reliability and ownership, so that you can cut through the noise. And you can actually follow along on how we do that by going to ground.news/mentor or by scanning this QR code. Over 200 outlets covered the NTSB findings about the involved fatigue cracks in the UPS MD-11 accident, but that was a detail that not everyone reported on in the same way. For example, GB News, a right-leaning outlet, uses dramatic, sensationalist language to focus on the horror of the event, whilst the left-leaning Jalopnik takes a more technical approach, highlighting the cracked engine mount and what it means for aviation safety. Now, if you use the Vantage plan like I do, you will also get features like My News Bias, which helps you to spot your own reading habits and discover more balanced sources. And just personally, knowing that I'm getting the complete picture with my news gives me confidence that I'm also truly understanding what's going on. So, check out ground.news/mentor, scan this QR code or hit the link in the description for a 40% discount on the unlimited subscription as a gift to yourself or to someone you care about. That's just $5 per month for a limited time. Big thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the news. Our next story got a lot less attention than the stories that I've already covered, and it actually happened late in October, but after we recorded our previous news roundup. On the 28th of October, India and Russia announced a plan to start manufacturing airliners together in India. Specifically, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, or HAL, will manufacture the Yakolev SG-100, previously known as the Sukhoi Superjet or SSJ. And in this latest version, it is supposed to use all Russian components, including the engines. Originally, this aircraft was powered by the Powerjet SAM-146, which is a turbofan that uses a core derived from the CFM56. And the whole engine was a shared project between Safran in France and NPO Saturn in Russia. But after the 2022 sanctions, that arrangement obviously became impossible. So Russia accelerated the development of an all-Russian variant that would instead use the Aviad Vigatel PD-8 engines. But it's not clear if that aircraft version is fully certified yet. Either way, those engines aren't enough to fully Russify this plane. Around 55 to 60% of the original plane's costs involved foreign components like avionics, landing gear, hydraulics, electrical and electronic systems, and even cabin equipment. In fact, even the carbon fiber used to make the plane's composite structure was sourced from outside of Russia. Now, we've covered these developments before on this channel, but the point here is that you can read this partnership with India in two possible ways. Firstly, it could be a shrewd way for Russia to get around international sanctions and trade restrictions to get more aircraft made. And that could mean that a nice sale to India might be around the corner, or even to other international buyers. And it could perhaps even make it possible to produce spare parts to support the existing fleet of SG-100s already in service in Russia. And that could work even if those planes have Western engines and other parts, which they currently do. Or this can be seen in a different way. This is a development that could beg the question, is Russia even able to produce this aircraft at home anymore? You see, only a handful, about 7 SSJs or SG-100s, were delivered to airlines after the 2022 sanctions, and all of those were reportedly assembled with foreign engines and other components that were already present in Russia at the time that the sanctions hit. And as far as we know, no Russified SG-100s appears to have entered service yet. The same also goes for the newer, bigger MC-21. A fully Russian version is reportedly getting flight tested, but the certification schedule of that aircraft remains unclear. India, on the other hand, have been keen to promote their own aviation industry as much as possible and also to expand airport infrastructure in India itself. Plus, As we record this, India is subject to 50% tariffs from the United States, all of which possibly explains their motivation to turn towards Russia instead. But with international geopolitics changing rapidly, the picture that we see today might look really differently in just a few months, so we will monitor this with great interest. Next up, we have the conclusion of an awkward aviation story that has dragged on for far too long. And I don't mean the US government shutdown, although that one also ended in November after becoming the longest such shutdown in history. And the fact that it finally ended eased the burden on air traffic controllers and other key workers in the aviation industry substantially. No, the story that dragged on even longer than that shutdown was the strike of Boeing workers in the St. Louis area, where Boeing builds military aircraft like the FA-18 and the F-15, along with munitions and other military contracts. Negotiations between Boeing and their workers in St. Louis had initially stalled for weeks, with several fruitless contract votes going along the way. And the end finally came on Thursday, November the 13th, when 68% of the IAM District 837 Workers Union, numbering around 3,200 people, voted in favor of approving Boeing's latest 5-year contract offer. Now, that offer wasn't actually an improvement from earlier versions. It did double the upfront cash incentives from $3,000 to $6,000, but it also removed $4,000 in bonuses that would have come later. According to Reuters, many Boeing workers believed that the workforce as a whole was just fatigued by the strike, which wasn't that surprising since it ended up lasting a full 101 days. But even this isn't the last worker contract and possible strike that Boeing have to face. According to Scott Hamilton in Leham News, in January next year, around 1,600 members of Boeing's SPEEA Engineers Union in Wichita, now working for Spirit, are due for a new contract of their own. But Boeing's biggest challenge will probably come from the SPEEA's 17,000 workers in Washington, Oregon, California and Utah, whose contract is due for renewal in October next year. So stay tuned. Now, with the US government shutdown finally over, the FAA can start working through some other issues, which brings us to our next November story. And this is something worth keeping an eye on over the next few months: air traffic control. Very soon, US Transport Secretary Sean Duffy and his team will need to decide on the company that will handle the overhaul of the country's air traffic control system. We've made a video explaining this in some great detail a few weeks ago, and how the government shutdown affected this process. But in short, the current ATC infrastructure is older than many of the people that operate it. A few months ago, US Transport Secretary Sean Duffy stated that sometimes the FAA has to shop for spare parts for key equipment on eBay. And that's because a lot of this equipment is so old that it doesn't have any kind of official support from its manufacturers anymore. Now, when eBay wasn't an option, ATC workers sometimes had to create replacement parts using 3D printers. So, at the moment, 51 out of the 138 ATC telecommunication systems are reportedly unsustainable. But as we explained in our previous video, creating a comprehensive replacement for all of this infrastructure is incredibly expensive. The US Congress has already approved $12.5 billion for the project, but the Transport Secretary says that another $19 billion will likely be needed on top of that. Now, the FAA has explored some cheaper alternatives though. Currently, the ATC system relies on two separate platforms: ERAM, which stands for En Route Automation Modernization, and STARS, which stands for the Standard Terminal Automation Replacement System. In very simple terms, ERAM is used to handle aircraft up at higher altitudes, whereas STARS is involved near airports where flights depart or come in for approach and landing. Now, ideally, the FAA want a single new ATC system to replace both of these existing systems, but some proposed alternatives would take a more moderate approach, keeping these systems separate. But the latest news is that the FAA will expect companies that want to bid to handle this overhaul to come up with a single modern platform that will take care of everything at once as was originally the plan. So with aviation safety still at the forefront of everyone's minds, we can only hope that this project will get the attention and the funding that it really needs. Now, speaking of aviation safety, let's talk about some deliberately unsafe actions that have been frustrating a lot of people handling air traffic around European airports in the past few weeks. You've probably heard of cases of drones being spotted flying near or over several European airports lately. Well, these incidents continued happening in November, but in addition to drones, air traffic controllers and pilots now also had to deal with balloons. Yep, Vilnius airport in Lithuania had to close for more than an hour on Thursday, the 20th of November, because of balloons flying near the country's border with Belarus. Now, European governments have so far treated drone attacks as a form of hybrid warfare, and even though they didn't necessarily name Russia as the culprit, it didn't really matter. In the case of these balloons, though, there is an extra twist to this story. You see, Lithuania believes that these were weather balloons which had been repurposed by smugglers in Belarus to fly cigarettes across the border. Vilnius airport is only around 30 kilometers or 18.5 miles away from the border, which is why they are easily affected by this type of entrepreneurship. Authorities in Lithuania believe that these balloon flights are as much about selling contraband cigarettes as they are about deliberate disruption, hence the term hybrid attack. Beyond that, Brussels in Belgium and Eindhoven in the Netherlands, as well as several other airports, have had to close down temporarily in November because of drones, with many officials believing this to be coordinated attacks. Closer to Ukraine, Poland and Romania also had to close down sections of their airspace and also scramble fighter jets when attack drones with explosives intended for Ukraine crossed into their territories. On one occasion, a drone was tracked more than 100 kilometers inside of Romanian borders. Now, airlines and flight crews have procedures to mitigate against such risks, but frankly, aviation is already complicated enough without introducing threats like these, or indeed the incendiary bombs that I looked at in another video that I recently did. Finally, with the end of the year almost upon us, this is the time when aviation analysts start looking into how close Boeing and Airbus are to hitting their aircraft delivery targets for the year. Airbus wanted to deliver 820 aircraft by the end of 2025, and in the first 10 months of the year, they have so far delivered 585. Boeing has had more modest targets than Airbus for several years now, and 2025 was no different. They are aiming for 570 aircraft deliveries and have reached 493 in the first 10 months. So with that, it might look like both of them are still far away from their ultimate goals, especially Airbus, but they both tend to deliver considerably more aircraft in the last couple of months of the year, again, especially Airbus. Normally at this point we would also compare how the two are doing compared to last year, but this time comparisons are a little bit difficult since Boeing didn't produce many jets at all in the last quarter of last year because of the strikes. Now, Boeing have been increasing production for the 737 MAX in recent months, and in a related story in November, they announced that they have already begun working on expanding their facility in North Charleston, South Carolina, where they currently make the Boeing 787. This expansion was first announced back in August, but it seems to be progressing quite rapidly. Right now, Boeing only makes around 7 787s per month, but in less than a year from now, they're planning to raise that to 10. Like I said in the beginning, a lot happened in November, and I haven't even gotten to Airbus grounding around 6,000 of their Airbus A320 jets due to a possible vulnerabilities to solar flares, but we are creating a detailed, separate video about that right now, so stay tuned. Also, let me know if you noticed anything else that we should have been covering here, or that deserves its own Mentor Now episode. We love hearing from you. Either way, thank you for watching this news roundup to the end. We have another one of those to do for December, obviously, but that will come in January of 2026. So this means that you've just watched the last news roundup of 2025. So Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Please let me know if you like this format, since it's now been almost a year since we started doing them. Also, check out the special deal from our sponsor if you love keeping up with the news in an unbiased way. It really helps the channel. My name is Peter Hörnfeldt and you're watching Mentour now. Have an absolutely fantastic day and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.